Happy Halloween, everybody. We are here today for another episode of Dispatches from the Energy Transition. I'm here with my co-host, 𝗜𝘀𝘀𝘂𝗹𝘁𝗶𝘀𝗵 of Mayfield Renewables, and a couple familiar faces that we'll get to in a minute. Today's episode, number 5, is about industry education for the 21st century. Lucas, what are we talking about today?
We're joined by a couple close colleagues this month to chat about what the education and training landscape looks like for solar, energy storage, renewable industry more broadly, and some tools that we can use to maybe increase the effectiveness of our educational programs, a bit forward-facing toward the end at what trends we could expect within the industry, but we're hoping to go through a lot of examples today of some courses we've worked on and some material that we've learned from.
I think before we get started too, we just wanted to talk a little bit about why we're here. So Dispatches is focused on the energy transition, obviously. As we move to distributed generation, it's kind of fast and furious with new technologies, software, hardware, how they come together. So our idea with Mayfield and Outfit was to talk about an emerging technology in every episode and the projects that it impacts. So far this year, we've focused quite a bit on microgrids, battery storage, with some great episodes coming up this fall. What have you enjoyed most thus far, Lucas, talking about for you?
I think my favorite part has been just getting multiple perspectives. So going back to our first episode, we focused on microgrid modeling and talked to some experts at Zendy on how to model and really design microgrid systems using software. But then we also brought on a representative from the Tanana Chiefs Conference who represents 8 Alaskan tribal communities where those microgrids were going to get installed. So I've really enjoyed not only chatting with folks who are experts in the technology, but in some episodes, it's developers who are using it, and in others, it's the communities where those technologies are getting actually deployed and installed. So just hearing kind of from the onset of the project to the end of the project and a bit of voices on various perspectives throughout has been really interesting for me. What about you, Robert?
I think the most interesting thing is we have a global audience. About 15 or 20% of people attending are from around the world. And I think that kind of speaks to that we're all experiencing this at the same time, trying to figure it out together. It's pretty cool.
Great. Well, let's get into it. Maybe we should introduce ourselves first. You want to start us off, Robert?
Sure. My name is Robert Cross. I'm the principal of Outfit. We are the clean tech marketing agency. We work with project developers, manufacturers, and service providers. A lot of the work we do is pretty technical, B2B, and particularly focusing on the C&I or mid-market segment.
And I'm Lucas Miller, Senior Engineering Consultant with Mayfield Renewables. Mayfield is an engineering consultancy focused on mid-market solar, energy storage, and microgrids. So we support project engineering. We also do project and some product consulting. And thirdly, we do some education as well, which we'll really dive into here today. So building some training curriculum for developers and manufacturers around engineering best practices, codes, standards, and product listings. We're joined today by Brendan Brown and Ryan Mayfield. Brendan, you want to kick us off? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm Brendan Brown. I'm an interdisciplinary designer with Outfit. And a lot of folks ask, what is an interdisciplinary designer? And if graphic design is visual problem solving, I would say interdisciplinary design is more a broader approach that pulls from various fields, engineering, technology, maybe even psychology, to create designs that consider multiple facets of user experience, functionality, aesthetics, etc.
And last but not least, we have Ryan Mayfield, founder, subject matter expert, Mayfield Renewables. Do you want to introduce yourself, Ryan?
Sure. Thanks, Lucas. Ryan Mayfield, and yeah, as founder of Mayfield Renewables, I started the company back in 2007, and I've been in the industry in the solar industry specifically since '99, pretty much where I've spent my entire professional career. So excited to be here. And yeah, big part of, Lucas did a great job introducing who we are, what we do. And for me, education is a very important part of what we do. And so doing things like dispatches, we have our other vehicles that we do, that we put content out there. So this conversation just is part of what we are, who we are, and what we do. So excited to be here. Thanks.
Ryan, so we've been working together for several years now. One of the things that I find most interesting, how does education or training, what role does it play in engineering from your perspective? Because so much of your career has been focused on codes and standards and the learning environment, but can you talk a little bit how the two aspects of the business come together?
Sure. Yeah, and it's an interesting, and definitely have had conversations with other folks in the industry, other engineering firms, folks in the education space. And I would say we're a little bit unique in the sense of putting the two together. And I mean, engineering, which is a large part of the business, and we're constantly learning. The engineers, the industry is constantly evolving. Codes and standards are constantly evolving, and so there's always a learning aspect of it. So it's just nonstop. And for me, when I started the business, one of the very first things I was doing some training, and that was how I was. I had both sides were keeping me busy, both doing engineering and education. And so for me, it's very circular in the sense that the education helping teach the engineering side of the business, or helping them learn, but on the flip side, doing the engineering work, actually being neck deep in it and doing the work, helps inform the education as well. So it's very circular for kind of how they feed each other, and that's been a very positive thing, I would say, for our business and for our clients, both on the education and the engineering side, because we can bring that knowledge of how things are being built, how it's being employed, and then be able to help train and educate folks on that.
We both have been in the industry for quite a while. As we move away from standalone PV, right, the complexity around energy storage and microgrids, do you see education becoming more important, like software to hardware, all these different things coming on? What is your vantage point on that aspect?
Sure. Yeah, no, I think it's definitely the systems we're seeing now are definitely more complex, and it's very similar to what we were doing early 2000s with PV. Quite honestly, it's at that point, straight PV projects weren't necessarily straightforward. They weren't super well-known quantity. There was a lot. We were educating a lot of AHJs, a lot of utilities around what these systems can and can't do. Adding the storage aspect, adding those different use cases, the different ways, the control mechanisms to actually have these systems work the way we want to. It's just inherently more complex than a PV system that, at this point, is, I don't want to say it's easy or anything like that, but it's a pretty well-known quantity. And it was actually interesting talking with a representative from city recently, and just yesterday actually talking about how cities being very risk adverse, and solar is pretty much a well-known quantity for them at this point, because we're so far into it. So kind of getting back to the question of, I would say the education is even more important because of all the different parts and pieces, making sure that things are fitting together and actually working the way that they're supposed to, which is, one of the hardest parts, quite honestly, of making sure the controllers are doing their job right, and in an energy storage system, and in delivering energy, delivering what the customers need when they need it.
I know very recently you guys had your first education summit in Austin, Texas. As a pretty big event, it was well received. I guess, Lucas, you can chime in here too. What did you guys see in the summit? And talk to me a little bit about that experience, this gathering with the industry and the different workshops that you got to do that day.
Sure, I can jump on that one first, and then, but yeah, the education summit was, I would say, was a huge success for us. We down in Austin, Laurel Hamilton, our general manager, had a huge hand in making sure all of this it went well, and we had over 200 folks join us. I had an evening event, and then the next day had a full day of training with 3 different tracks, and so got great feedback from folks, and it was very, very satisfying to see us do that, and focus in on technical education, and meeting not only our clients but other folks out in the industry, people that were needing to talk about the different parts of it, the codes and standards, applications. Some of the stuff that we'll show you here in this deck coming up is we were presenting as well. So it was a great event, and before we even left, we were already talking about next year. So kind of a sign of, I think, how well it went for us as a company, and then just also the outreach that we had to the industry.
Yeah, and if I can add to that a bit, I had my hand in a few of those sessions, and I really enjoyed how they turned out. They seemed very well received by the audience. But what I found even most valuable was in between sessions. We weren't sure exactly what the audience was going to look like. We ended up with a few hundred folks from around the country and in various roles throughout the industry who all came together for this. And so we'd have sessions throughout the day, but in between those sessions and during the lunch hour, you'd find yourself in a room surrounded by folks from, an inverter manufacturer to your left, and an AHJ to your right, and a big developer right next to them. And just the conversations that you could have in that type of environment, especially when everyone's coming together with the intention of learning and sharing knowledge. I almost found just as much value from the classes as just getting that many people together with that shared goal in mind.
And I guess kind of my last talking point on this slide, I know that Mayfield's invested in online courses, and you're growing that library. We can't always get together in person. When we talk about replicating the field environment, what are you trying to accomplish with the online courses, and what is that about?
Yeah, so we're doing both online courses and like virtual meetings, so over Zoom or similar type applications, but trying to be able to reach people as much as we can. At Mayfield, we are a completely remote team, and so and I know a lot of other companies are doing that, and so it just, the technology where we're at, and just where in the industry where we're at, just generally working these days, a lot of things are remote, and so we're able to do that, and I would say pretty effectively be able to meet people where they're at, have conversations, do lunch and learn style trainings, or do asynchronous online trainings. And so really what we're trying to do is just give people that ability to get training kind of where they're at, on their time when they need it, and covering the different topics of, for me, codes and standards is very important. It's something I spend a lot of time on, and making sure that we're communicating that, getting people that information so they can, even do bite-sized 10-minute at a time or something like that, and get the information that's pertinent for the industry, and so that they can put to use right away.
Great.
One other thing I do want to mention, and Ryan, if you have more to add, please do, but something we've been hearing more and more from our clients on the education side. So we're oftentimes teaching developers, manufacturers, teams of their staff about engineering best practices and codes and standards, but we're hearing from them that they're more and more responsible for educating their clients and communities these days. I attended a heat map webinar this morning about community engagement and pushback around renewable projects around the country and how that's only growing. And it takes really a small voice, a handful of people in a community to halt a PV project or an energy storage project. And so we're finding that in some of our training courses, the material is to define what a project or project could do, but it's also maybe here are some talking points that you could take to a community meeting, or a developer could help them get in touch with a community, get some buy-in, working with first responders to really help continue deployment of these assets. But that's something that I've seen more and more of in the past year. Is just it's not only us trying to keep people up to date with the technology and engineering behind them, but also give them tools to then go into these communities and really approach people and tell them, here's how this works, here's why it's safe, here's how we're working with first responders to make sure that, you know, this isn't posing a risk or a hazard to your community. So we're hoping that what we teach can then be extended beyond just that company. That's been a newer thing that I've noticed quite a bit in the last year.
Yeah, and it's definitely something that we have done with some clients, and it's exactly right. Especially energy storage projects, we have seen some failures, and so making sure that people understand what the real risks are, and as an industry that we're not just trying to sweep things under the rug, and we're also not letting people say things that are blatantly false or inaccurate, because that's pretty easy to do anymore, just to grab a headline and put that in front of your county council or whatever it is, and without having all the facts. And so definitely something that we're engaging with people on, and it is an important thing as our systems get more complex, and, you know, as we're adding storage especially.
I can see both sides of the equation. As there's more storage, distributed generation, microgrids, there's a lot of benefits to these technologies as well. They're not necessarily that easy to communicate, depending on whether time of use is involved, peak shaving. There's a lot of different aspects to it. And I think in general, we're all learning at the same time. A lot to work on.
Yeah.
Well, and a big part of how we put together our training material is working with companies like Outfit, and really presenting our concepts visually and in a variety of different files and formats. Outfit is our primary partner for developing a lot of this content. And Robert, I'd love to maybe start with you and tell us a little bit about, you know, what Outfit is, what your typical clients look like, and what's the story behind starting the company.
Thank you, Lucas. As you know, my primary business is a consultancy, and today a lot of that focuses on revenue strategy, product market fit, go-to-market strategy. And having been in the industry for almost 20 years, I think that the energy transition is kind of compelling. It's very interesting. There's a lot of cool things happening. But on the marketing side, there's an opportunity to step it up. And you can kind of see it through the slogan here. Our idea is, look, if we're working on cool technologies that are making a big impact, our primary goal is to make sure that you show up well. And we can kind of demonstrate the value of the work that we're doing. A lot of this is through film, photography, and videography. We probably have filmed 60 or 70 projects over the past 4 to 5 years. And then more recently, and Brendan kind of can speak to this a lot, we're doing more and more with 3D design and animation. And that can kind of show up in a lot of different ways, whether it's a hero video explaining the value proposition of the technology, or the e-learning environment, or content marketing. So I would say, particularly this year, we've probably done more work in that area than any other aspect of the industry. And the last piece is people. There's a lot of great people working in this industry. People get excited about technology, in particular early adopters. And I think we would do well to tell those stories more. of our customers, of our stakeholders, in part to mitigate some of that mis or disinformation that's out there.
Yeah, and this could go for you or Brendan, Robert, but have any stories really stood out to you that you guys have highlighted so far in this work?
Yeah, there's quite a few. I think what I really like is to, the technologies that we work with are pretty complex. Some of our clients are battery scientists, chief engineers, and they're excited about the value of the technology. What we get happy about is to see if we can explain the value and how that impacts people. Sometimes that shows up in a company's growth, like Mayfield. Just the message is resonating. Their companies being recognized. In other instances, oddly enough, it helps a lot as a recruiting tool. So one of the more recent clients that we've worked with here in Oregon, a project developer, we did a film talking about their mission and their vision, and they wound up getting a couple new employees because they saw the values that the company stood for. But at the end of the day, whether it's a battery technology, whether it's a project being developed, if it has to do with a shift in the energy transition, we're trying to tell stories and we're trying to show the impact of the technology that we're working with.
Great, and I know we've got a lot of really great examples of some 3D work and animations that Brendan, I know you've had your hand in. Could you maybe start us off, just tell us kind of what are we looking at here? What goes into creating 3D environments like this?
Yeah, so to start off, fortunately, a lot of the pipeline is tied in with the engineering process, like working with CAD files that have already been designed to go out to manufacturing, essentially is what I work with, what 3D animators and designers work with. And so it's taking those models, rendering them and placing them into virtual environments. And what's great about it is it allows also the possibility to create visual assets for learning and also for even marketing collateral before maybe a physical product exists, which can be really great also if you're looking to, get some investor buy-in, or you just want to get ahead of the game and already start creating material ahead of the game. The other thing that back to kind of the other conversation that sets us apart, I think, a little bit from a more traditional marketing approach is because this is a primary medium that we're working in, 3D environments. We're very closely in dialogue directly with the engineers, product designers, developers, and we have an understanding of the technology. And I've worked in different agencies and organizations in the past where there were so many silos between the person at the very end of the chain that was designing the asset to the engineer who knew all the technical information around the product. And so I think our approach, whether it's in the context of developing learning materials or more external marketing collateral, really cuts a lot of corners and makes things just more efficient, and I believe has a greater impact just on the fact that we understand and care about the technology itself.
Lucas, I just got a question that I'll answer live. An attendee's asking, is this a kind of a digital twin? No, they're not digital twins. They could be digital twins. For those that are not aware, a digital twin is essentially a digital replica of a physical asset. We're going to see this more and more in the energy transition. The examples that are illustrated here is our work with different manufacturers and service providers. A fair amount of this is in content marketing. Some of it's for education, but these are not digital twins.
And we also got a pre-submitted question from Peter. This one's for you, Brendan. What tools do you use when rendering and building 3D solar arrays or other 3D assets like this?
Yeah, that's always a great question. And for better or worse, there's lots of options, and it really depends on the use case. For me, because I also work with video and other motion graphic compositing, specifically the Adobe suite, I use in my work most of the time Cinema 4D, which also integrates, and that's the software. It integrates a variety of render engines that you can choose from, which I like. For example, if you're doing more environmentally textural heavy scenes, you want some nature, it works pretty nice for that. That being said, Autodesk 3ds Max is also a great choice for folks that are already maybe working with the Autodesk ecosystem. So AutoCAD might be, a software that is already being used. There's already maybe an integration there as well. And I believe they now have I think Arnold is now, and Arnold is the render engine, is now internal to 3ds Max. One interesting thing, and this kind of goes into back to the digital twin conversation that we're seeing a lot happening really just the last couple of years, is the use of Unreal Engine, which is the game development platform. I don't know, Fortnite is one that has been made with this engine, and it's being used to create virtual environments that you can create, basically like first-person flyover aerial experiences that you can create videos, of course, in animation sequences or just still renders, but you can also create more immersive environments. I mean, think in terms of learning, specifically kind of mission critical moments, simulating environments or layouts that would be harder to photograph or sometimes impossible to kind of visualize with traditional methods. It allows, just a lot there. But then also for trade show applications, you see more and more interactive kind of displays that serve as conversation pieces that go a little bit further sometimes than just having maybe one part of a product of a larger system. And also it makes it so you don't have to pay the shipping for sometimes very large components, which can just also be a whole headache.
A couple other points before we move on. We work in the built environment with the hardware, right? In these systems. As there's more integration with energy storage and microgrids, there's a lot more software that's part of it, and there's data. And at the end of the day, animation is very helpful to explain the balance of system. Animation is very helpful to explain how hardware and software interact and work together. And I think you're going to see more and more of it as we move forward into the future.
Yeah, and I like how you both have kind of touched on really, I think one of our key points for this whole webinar, which is material like what we're looking at here is useful in a variety of ways. It's not only for education and training, but for educating your clients at a conference setting or for building eye-catching promotional material that maybe you post on social media, but it's the exact same animation that you'd use to train your applications engineers or field techs. So I'm wondering, Robert, on Outfit's side of things, are most of your clients coming to you with the initial intention more of that kind of promotional conference education aspect, or more on the pure education and training? And where do you guys typically land on those projects?
It's a good question. We do a lot of content marketing for trade shows and product marketing. And in particular in the B2B space, which a lot of CNI and mid-market is. When you look at some of these examples with EPS Americas or Paired Power, which is on here, a lot of times you can take some of these animations and use them more for an e-learning environment. If you're trying to walk somebody through a demo and how our product works, but at the same time, if you have a pitch deck or you're trying to use sales enablement tools, they can work in that regard too. That's again another reason why I like animation. The second aspect of it is obviously a lot of us are drawn to this because we're technical people, whether it's on the engineering side or product design, product marketing. From my vantage point, a lot of times it's easier to show the value proposition than talking about all these widgets and logics in granular detail. And that's probably a major reason why Outfit exists. We're trying to show the value proposition of technology.
Yeah, and I like you mentioned there, show not tell, which transitions us nicely to, we want to take a look at one example of Mayfield and Outfit working together. In this case, for a client, 𝗍𝗁, a global manufacturer of electrical testing tools. They approached both companies over a year ago at this point to work on an electrical testing standards guide project, overviewing a wide range of electrical tests. Primary example we're going to look at here is insulation resistance testing. So as a part of this project, Mayfield wrote a series of chapters on what the test process is, what the electrical concepts are behind it. But then we also worked with Outfit to put all of that into an online course, which we just published on the Mayfield website this week, and which we're looking at a preview of here in this window. Ryan, maybe I'd like to start with you here. If you could just tell us a little bit more about how did this project come to be? What is 𝗍𝗁 looking to achieve by really building out this explanatory material on these tests?
Sure. So yeah, so this is the culmination of multiple years of work, really. In working with 𝗍𝗁 directly, we have done some written work where we were putting together a guide with them. They have a guide that's out there that's been kind of the gold standard for doing insulation resistance testing, so the generic name for it. And it's called a stitch in time. It's something that they've had for many, many years, and people reference it all the time. One of the things that we were trying to do with them is bring the renewable industry kind of being able to integrate their tools with the renewables industry. It makes a lot of sense. Of course, we're using electrical testing tools, and people know this test process. I mean, yeah, it's a very common electrical testing process that you do, something that should be integrated into solar applications. And what 𝗍𝗁 was finding was that they were getting a lot of questions about it. They were having to explain how to do this process with their customers. And so by putting together both the written, kind of the writing it out and putting it together in a booklet type form, and then also putting together a class like this where going through, and you can see as it's scrolling through, we have some in-field testing that we were doing, some in-field filming and doing the test itself. So walking through and doing that exact test, putting graphics together so that we can see, how the systems are set up, and then using the 3D interactive stuff that we worked with Outfit on in order to kind of help bring it home. So it's trying to take what is a very tactile and a very traditionally hands-on approach of doing training for kind of this 21st century, where being able to again meet people where they're at, helping explain things, show it in different ways so that they can see it a little bit differently, and kind of hopefully get some of those aha moments. Like maybe it doesn't make perfect sense when you're watching somebody do it in a video, but then you see an animation and we're able to really pinpoint certain specific points of that animation or the test that we're doing, and really hopefully bring it all home for people. One of the things that I really like about this process and this approach is the ability for somebody to take this course, let's say, in the office, at home, whatever it is, and then translating that, taking it out to the field, and I don't want to say practicing, but putting it to use, going and actually then using those tools, and then even having a reference point, like being able to pull up on your phone, like go look at that again. What was that point? What should I be doing here? It made sense when I was watching it, but now all of a sudden I'm standing in front of the inverter and it's like, oh gosh, what am I supposed to do? And one of the things we talked about as we were preparing for this webinar is, around safety. And so I think this might be a good time to kind of talk about that, where, safety is paramount in any, whenever you're doing any sort of electrical testing. And so, obviously watching it through this way, being able to click some buttons, and you're not going to hurt yourself, but you would see, like, if I did this wrong, oh, this is what's going to happen, and this is why it would happen, and be able to walk through those things in order to be a little bit more safe once you do walk into the field and start approaching these.
Brian, that's a good segue to a live question. I know a lot of your background is in codes and standards and doing so much work in that aspect of the industry. So we have a question from Christopher Youngstrom, a frequent dispatches attendee. How soon until codes and standard descriptions and training can be created using digital tools?
Yes. Trying to make sure I understand the question right. So Christopher, if it's not answering it quite right, you might need to kind of chime in a little bit. But yeah, I mean, so a lot of what we're doing around this course is around, an IEC and a standard for doing some testing. And so trying to take those written words, a chart, you're going to basically the IEC standard saying you will do a insulation resistance test. Doesn't give us a whole lot more than that. There's a little bit of explanation inside of that, but for the most part, it's just saying, here's how to do it. And so, or not how to do it, but you will do it. And so taking these tools and kind of doing the how part of it. And then also there's some why into this. Why are we doing this? What is it? What are you going to get the results for? I think really helps drive home those points. Whereas, somebody might be trained on how to do an insulation resistance test. You can read the meter, you can document what it is, but if you don't know why you're doing it, what the results mean, all those kinds of things, it's not as good. So I think we're in the process now of doing exactly that, taking those code requirements and putting them into this digital format in that sense.
And I would think, like looking at UL 9540, a lot of these different issues, I think, Ryan, as you're kind of saying, online or e-learning doesn't displace classroom per se.
Correct.
And classroom doesn't necessarily displace field training, but maybe it's how these different pieces and parts come together can be pretty valuable, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is by no means what I say that, especially on this topic, can this replace in-person or field training, either internal or external. So this is one of those tools in the tool belt to help make sure people are feeling comfortable and understand, the whys and the hows, and feeling more comfortable on actually going and putting the tools in their hand and feeling confident and competent in what they're doing.
One segue, if I may, that I've seen really being a trend is kind of the blended approach, where you would have interactive digital assets before, let's say, a live training. So folks can kind of come prepared, can kind of have gone through some interactive experiences, and then you're able to also use time sometimes in a more meaningful way in the in-person moment. And then after the live training, then you have this really nice paper trail where you can have search functionality where it's like, oh, I forgot, this one thing. And then you have like this digital guide that then you can refer back to, that can also be kind of almost a living document that can be continuously improved on, that has access sometimes to maybe, let's say, community forums that just serve as a way to continue kind of where things were left off, because everything's always in flux, it's always changing. So I think this also this method is designed to adapt to that as well.
Yeah, and one thing that we were chatting about in prep for this webinar is just everyone has a different method of learning. Like you really have to meet people where they're at. And for me personally, being in the industry since 2017, almost all of my experience is through conceptual training and not as much the hands-on in-field training. And so having assets that provide maybe the exact same material, but presented in 2 or 3 or 4 different ways can go a really long way to fully wrapping your head around something, giving you that experience without having to set foot on the field, or at least like setting you up so when you do inevitably go to work on a roof or on a ground mount, you're already somewhat familiar with it. You've already encountered it, both in a schematic like what we're looking at here, a wiring diagram, but also maybe a video of someone performing it in the field. And from a safety perspective as well, especially when we're talking about electrical testing, what happens if you fail, right? What happens if you get an abnormal result? What happens if you don't? If you mess up, let's say, and a lot of students learn most from failure, which isn't always an option when you're training hands-on in the field, but can be something that we can control in these virtual environments, where maybe we present them with a ground fault all of a sudden, or there's suddenly voltage on the line when you don't expect it. We're much better off presenting that scenario in a virtual setting up front versus responding to that if and when it happens in person. And with that, let's maybe move to
We have a couple other questions.
Sure.
So Chris from Tri-State Services, maybe this is good for you, Ryan. Do you see an opportunity to train folks on data recording documentation? I mean, I guess either one of us could answer this. I think there is an opportunity to do that. Ryan, what is your perspective?
Oh, sure. I mean, you name a topic and there's opportunities to train folks, I would say, especially people out in the field where, Chris, I know the business that you guys are in, you're doing the O&M, and the documentation part of this is probably more than half the battle, quite honestly. So once your folks are trained up, know how to use the tools, and they're comfortable with that, that almost can become second nature for some folks. Getting that data, recording it, being able to analyze it, and then use it in the future is a huge part. And so, there's tools that are out there. We'll kind of give our shout out to SolarGrade and 𝗜ļiable, our friends out there, that they have a great product that helps do that. But this integrating that in with these tools and that process, and I think that's a big part of it, is what that process is too. And quite honestly, getting the pens and pencils out of the technician's hands and using the tools, the digital tools in that aspect as well. So definitely some opportunities there to train folks, and also on process.
And Ryan, maybe a general question, but with your experience in training on not just electrical testing, but codes and standards, and frankly, a lot of denser topics that relate to these technologies, have you found any particular strategies that are effective for teaching and students learning these denser, maybe, I know codes and standards is kind of your wheelhouse, and it's a lot of heavy text and maybe esoteric terms. So what have you found success with regard to learning strategies?
Yeah, that one, that's a great question. And that's one that I'm constantly working on and trying to think of and understand. And so I'm doing my own research and my own kind of learning how adults learn and how to best present materials and things like that. And so for me, I think a lot of it is, and you see it in again, in this course that we've done, trying to take this approach of saying the same thing kind of in different ways and finding ways of explaining things hopefully in a different way, so that just because you say something or you put some text up on a screen, can't expect that everybody's going to take it in exactly the same way. And then the other part that I think has worked really well, and I try and do it, and sometimes with codes it can be difficult, but putting a story to it, or putting real world examples. So if we can explain, if folks are the technicians understand what a combiner box is, or what the wiring box inside of an inverter is, and so being able to take things from those esoteric terms or those esoteric ideas and putting them into practice. And with codes and standards, it's a lot of times it can just be this jumble of words, but relating that to how they're actually what it means to them in their day-to-day. And so that's been a big part of what I've tried to do. Hopefully, been successful with it in terms of getting that information across for folks.
I think that correlates to another comment here. Greg Smith, the Global Director of Learning for 𝗤𝗏. 𝗤𝗏 also works with Outfit. He brings up a good comment, Ryan. I think you and I both have our perspectives on this. So once you train your students using these awesome tools, what processes do you have to ensure the skills are used properly in the field? It is difficult for vendors or trainers to address this. And I think because I work with 𝗏𝗏 with Ryan as well, that's in part how this all came to being, right? So 𝗏𝗏 has testing equipment. There's a lot of complexity that's happening here in the commissioning, operation, and maintenance of systems. So in one regard, they're making the electrical testing standards guide that's a physical guide. In another regard, we're trying to replicate chapters in an e-learning environment. Some people are going to use a physical guide. Some people are going to use an e-learning environment. At the end of the day, it's kind of like a continuous learning. And I think something that the industry really hasn't figured out, and I think this is also in part where Mayfield comes into play. Yes, as a manufacturer or service provider, you're making physical tools or software. I think Mayfield's trying to help on the education and learning side. I know Laurel talks about this a bit. We all kind of have a shared interest, right? To make sure that systems are installed correctly. I don't know that there's an easy answer to the question, especially because of how quickly everything's happening.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's a great easy answer, unfortunately. But Greg, every box, there's that free manual that comes in there, and we all know that people read it. So, that's the easiest answer right there. Just read the free manual. And just trying to be a little cute there. But I think one of the ways, and I've actually talked with some folks about doing training and taking this and applying it with their technicians. And so talking with some folks where they're actually training people using these kinds of tools, but then going out into the field. And not that as a manufacturer or a vendor you can really do this, but this is more at the company level, I would say. But have that technician with somebody who's a little bit more senior, who maybe is responsible for the training and the safety within your company. This is what I'm going to do. Make them, here's what I'm going to do. Here's what we're looking at. Here's the steps I'm going to take, kind of repeating what they've learned before they even do it. But it's a tough one, just because that takes time, effort, energy. But if we can get people feeling more comfortable and confident in what they're doing, I think that's kind of a way to do that, to build on these types of tools.
I think there's also an analytics side of it, right? So when I talk to manufacturers and service providers about the investment in this type of work, yes, there's an upfront cost. At the same time, if you have systems that are installed properly and you're reducing truck rolls, or you're keeping systems up, right? You got to kind of quantify the other sides of this, whether you're mitigating the risk or increasing uptime. And I don't know that we're there yet in being able to do all that. And maybe Brendan kind of wants to speak to this as well, with just some of the different companies that we're working with. Now, in some regards, these assets are being used for e-learning, but at the same time, they're also being used at trade shows. So if you create the 3D renders and you start building a library of your tools or your system, sometimes it works out better if you're using it in a variety of use cases.
Yeah, maybe I can add a little bit to that and just show kind of on screen. Greg, you're totally correct. I mean, there's at the end of the day, part of the responsibility will fall on the developer or O&M provider and to determine what their own internal processes are. What we tried to do with this course is at the end of the course, there's an interactive 3D walkthrough. We saw part of it in the previous snippet. This is the virtual environment in which it takes place, where we actually have students do the test in a physical 3D environment at the end of the course. So they've learned the process using illustrations, wiring diagrams. They've seen Ryan perform it in the field. They've seen animations like this. And then at the very end of the course, they're prompted to go through an actual virtual environment and perform the test themselves step by step with multiple choice questions along the way and other prompts like, where do you apply a test lead? This being a perfect example on screen now. And so that's our best effort to offer a digital kind of final test, give the student an opportunity to do it themselves. But after that point, I think like everyone on the call has just mentioned, there's perhaps many different ways that a developer could take that final step of maybe having an apprenticeship model where you have to take an online class first, then you go in the field and watch someone perform it with you physically right next to them before you can. But this has been our approach, at least for this course, is to have the student have a little bit of ownership of it at the end and do the test themselves, still in a controlled virtual environment where they can make mistakes and there won't be any shock hazard associated with it. But Brendan, I don't know if you have anything else to add about methods to really boost the effectiveness of this sort of training.
Maybe not anything specific to boosting sort of the method, but maybe where I see things going a bit. And that would be kind of mobile film use, field use. So being able to create content that can also be packaged and pulled out of your pocket and referenced again. Almost like we could almost consider this like training material, but then that preps you for live training in the field. But then you also have like this sort of pocket guide or resource that can be used for like ongoing performance support. So I guess going back to the original question, yeah, it's really hard to answer kind of like concrete metrics, but my spidey sense would be that if as things are going, if digital guides and interactive platforms that can be kind of used in the moment are available, I would be very curious to see the outcome of what that would look like. And I would hope that we would see less mistakes and surprises.
Yeah, and one other thing that we had talked about in prep for this is the potential to turn what we're looking at here into a full-on augmented reality or virtual reality environment. Maybe in a few years, those virtual reality headsets are a bit cheaper or more accessible and could be used as an even better approximation of these field environments. But Brendan, I don't know if you could speak to, is there a huge leap that we need to take in developing these assets to make them ready for augmented reality, virtual reality? Are we just building off of what we already have here?
Exactly. So it's all the same kind of production pipeline. So everything that you're seeing in this 3D scene could be migrated to an interactive scene where we're really walking around in that sort of liminal virtual space with a headset, with the glasses, you name it. And yeah, that's the great news, is it's all the same technology stack, let's say.
And are other industries maybe are a little ahead of the curve on this in terms of using these 3D environments for training?
Yeah, great question. Yes, the big ones are the medical industry, specifically surgery. I mean, yeah, you're talking like the most mission critical kind of field possible. It's great as humans to be prepped for traumatic events that we need to react to quickly. So the medical field's a big one. Military aerospace is a big one. Automotive, we're seeing as well. Going back full circle to Unreal Engine, there's some really wild use cases of Subaru and I think Volvo already using, even kind of at the initial design stage, some of these virtual experiences using Unreal Engine to drive the brain, let's say. But yeah, anything mission critical, that back to safety, back to just getting folks to deal with the human condition of stress, freaking out, and the moment we can get something on the table so where anyone can deal with that even a little bit before the real event happens. That's when I think, again, you can't measure the results, but I think we can all agree that there's probably there's a chance there's value there.
Great. Well, I know we're approaching the top of the hour. We want to start closing out here, and we've got just a few key takeaways, really just summarizing what we've talked about here. First one being the learning environment is becoming more digital, but also variable. Like we've talked about, there's more in-field training resources today. There's more pre-recorded online classes today. In the near future, we're expecting more augmented and virtual reality as well. And something that we haven't really mentioned underlying all of this is just how quickly the workforce is growing and how many green students are coming into it. And so going back to point number 2 here, meeting students where they're at, really emphasizing teaching the exact same topic in multiple ways, in formats, to make it approachable for the widest number of people. And so emphasizing using 2D, 3D, immersive walkthroughs, and maybe text booklets or explainers, just to meet people where they're at, given the wide variety and volume of people that are coming into this industry. And then thirdly here, the training material we've looked at today, you could really call all of that technical marketing material as well. And so often we're finding that the companies investing in this material could be coming from either end of that spectrum, either initially approaching us to work on some technical explanatory material for sales or engineering, but then finding that that exact same animation or wiring diagram would be just as useful for onboarding new staff or training their network. So the same assets can often be spread across multiple use cases to save a little bit of money on developing these pretty comprehensive assets. I'll open it up to the group before we close out. Anything else to add, Ryan, Brendan, Robert?
I think these.
I just think. Go ahead, Ryan.
I think these takeaways are pretty well cover what we've been talking about, and I think just the multitude of ways of meeting students where they're at. I think that's a big one for me, and just showing people different ways of seeing the same thing is really one of the great ways of driving everything home.
Yeah, my only comment is, again, from my vantage point, particularly in the mid-market segment, C&I, a lot of the assets that you can create can be used for a variety of uses. That makes it more feasible to do, whether you're trying to show up at the trade show, have a visual impact, interactive sales tools, but the same material can be used for e-learning at the same time.
All right. Well, Ryan and Brendan, want to thank you guys again. We've got some contact information on here. Also want to thank Solar Builder, who's a partner in putting all of this together. They'll be posting written summary of this. You can find a lot more great stuff on Solar Builder's website. And then Robert, you want to close this out and talk a bit about next month?
Yeah, we're really excited to have Mike Hall on, the CEO of 𝗜𝗁 Renewables. Pretty exciting software platform that's helping with procurement. And again, data, getting back to that data a lot. He'll be joined by 𝗜𝗁𝘀𝘂𝗹𝘁𝗶𝘀𝗀𝗀, the co-executive director of Working Power. This to show how the value of 𝗜𝗁's platform and data on demand helps with project development.
Great. Well, that'll do it for episode 5. I appreciate everyone tuning in, and we'll send an email with the recording and all the information about what we talked about today. And we hope to see you next month.